Don't believe the hype. Read the type. This is TYPBST.
Take a look. It's in a book. It's TYPBST, baby.
So, bro, did you get more homework?
What do you mean homework? What are you talking about?
Well, the last time somebody requested you reading a book.
Oh, yeah,
I think, which one was that? The last TYPBST episode. I know Jamar Tisby.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for the listener, was this a homework assignment?
Yes, it was given to me by Tanisha Williams, who's a long-time listener.
First-time caller.
First-time caller, long-time listener, Tanisha Williams. And so she, I saw her personally, and she asked me to do this book. And shout out to her wonderful, handsome husband, Brad Williams. What up, Brad?
Yeah, handsome.
Yeah, he's a good-looking dude, man. Yo, Tanisha, you got yourself a catch, man. Hold him tight. No, they're good people. They're wonderful people, man. Me and Brad always have really good conversations after he listens to the show, so. And I can't forget to give a big major shout out to the little homie Theo. What up, baby? Yeah, so nice. The book she requested was Gay Girl, Good God by Jackie Hill Perry. And so the book is, the tagline is the story of who I was and who God has always been. Now, I will preface my remarks with, anybody who knows me knows I hate poetry.
Okay.
And Jackie Hill is a poet, and I hate poetry. And I know hate's a strong word, and that's why I'm using it. But she's a rapper as well. But yeah, I love her rapping. But again, the book is written in a way that reflects her poetry game and her rap game. So the book is very lyrical. So I don't know, Joel, have you ever been to a poetry slam?
Actually, I think the only one I probably wasn't at it, but I was at it was back when we went to Legacy.
Okay, yeah, okay. Back in our Legacy days, yeah. So
way back.
So if you hear something deep, I'm gonna need you to snap your fingers.
Uh-oh.
All right, so I need you to snap your fingers with us when we hear Jackie say something deep, because she just has a way of just saying things that made me just kind of be like, oh, whoa, yeah, it just made you just take a step back and reread that sentence, kind of like back in the 90s when you would rewind a cassette when you heard of something lyrical. So I was very impressed with that, and the book was definitely engaging. If I can summarize the book for the listener, I would say that it is, and no hype, because this isn't HYPBST, this is TYPBST, right? So we're not about hype over here, but I would definitely say that the book is powerful.
Okay.
The book is powerful.
I being a man of less time on my hands with 2 young kids, I resorted to my trusty podcasting option.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll put it in the show notes page because I thought it was pretty good. But so on September 13th, 2018, just after the book came out, Jackie Hill Perry was on Wado Radio.
DJ Wado, shout out to DJ Wado.
Yeah, shout out to and our boy Anthony for his
who used to work
former work on the show.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that's a really good podcast for the listener. If you want, words straight out of her mouth, you can. I think a lot of what Darnell is going to say and my points as well, obviously, are going to resonate with the things she says from her book and from her story. So, yeah, as I said, I'll put that in the show notes page for the listener to reference. I'm also going to put in Tim Challies' review of the book because we like a lot of what Tim Challies does. So I thought it's another option for the listener just to be able to take it in.
Okay. And so the structure, the direction we'll be going in in regards to reviewing the book is we're going to look at why are people gay. Point 2, men are the problem. Point 3, stop being gay. And then point 4, same-sex attracted Christians.
And just for the listener, some of those titles I'm assuming are a little bit deeper than, those are tantalizing topics. Just to get the listener interested.
Well, those are more so those are more so my takeaways. So they're not They're not reflecting of the table of contents of the book. So the way how the book is structured, it's structured in 3 parts. So the first part is who I was, and then the second part 2 is who I became, and then part 3 is same-sex attraction and ...
And what I found interesting, just looking at the table of contents for the first 2 parts of the book, it's all kind of years as the chapter kind of titles, if you want to call it that. So chapter 1, 2006. Chapter 2, 6000 BC to AD 1995, and so on. There's some repetition there, but I just found when I'm seeing that, I'm like, oh, this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Would you, and from listening to the podcast with DJ Wado, or on Wado Radio, it sounds like a lot of part 1 and part 2 is very much stories to make her point.
Yeah.
Is that a fair?
Yeah, biographical, and
yeah.
her just walking through her life, which was really good, man. It was really good.
Just on that point, is part 3 still autobiographical?
No, it's basically her giving instructions on how Christians can better help those struggling with same-sex attraction, like real practical information on how to engage with people who have that, and even if you have it yourself. So she's talking to people to people that are struggling with it. So it's really practical. And honestly, like, even for me, and I'm a stickler for proper exegesis of scripture, proper biblical theology, sound doctrine. I fool around a lot.
What does that mean?
Huh?
Taken out of context, that could be very bad for you.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I fool around a lot, but when it comes to doctrine and theology, I'm always just like, yo, man, just say what the text says. Don't say any more, don't say any less, keep it in context. And she does that, and she's just phenomenal. She's just her exegesis, her theology, her insight, her exhortations are just, oh man, I was just so impressed. I was just like, yeah. No. I was just like, oh man, she's no joke. So yeah. Without further ado, let's just jump into it.
Okay.
So basically,
I think just for the listener who's super ignorant, just based on your, we're going to get into your takeaways. The one thing to understand is part of the reason why she has authority to kind of speak in section 3 is her story, right? So this is a girl who essentially was gay. That's based on the title, right? Gay girl, good God, meaning she lived a gay lifestyle. And then is now married with, I think, 2 kids?
2 kids.
Or 1 kid?
Yeah,
2 kids.
Eve and Autumn.
And so
or
to some
Autumn.
extent, Eve and Autumn.
Eden and Autumn.
Eden. Oh, okay. And so part 3 is kind of her speaking authoritatively from experience, but also scripture. Would you say that that's a proper? Okay. Yeah, just wanted to make sure for the listener, contextualizing that this is a girl who's telling her story of, what's experienced from being same-sex attracted, and living as the Bible calls us to live, or God calls us to live. So, without further ado, Darnell.
Okay.
Why are people gay?
First things first. Our papa freaks all the honeys, dummies, playboy bunnies, those wanting monies. Okay, so Jackie Hill tells her story about her struggling with or being a lesbian at one point in time. And so she starts out and she talks about a point in her life as a child where she kind of felt the pull towards lesbianism as a child. And so that was just something she kind of kept to herself. But she was just saying, like, she started noticing certain things about herself as a child. And so she starts talking about her relationship with her father. Oh, okay. Actually, no. Before that, so she lays the groundwork for the book with starting in Genesis, right? In regards to the fall of man. So that's where you get the whole 6000 BC to AD 1995. And so I'm going to read to you some of her. I'm going to read to you some passages from that section about what happened in Genesis. So on page 14, she says, "Not being one for small talk, he, the serpent, went straight to questioning her, Eve, about something God told her husband a little after he made him." And I thought that was a good insight into the created order and how God spoke to Adam first and gave him instruction to pass on to Eve. And then she goes on to say this, and I thought this was well said. And she says, "I imagined the tree looked different then. The fruit hung beneath their own branch, loose enough for the wind to move through each one. She noticed them and thought of her next meal, how they'd taste good on her plate, even if it meant she might not live to see the next chew. One blink later, her eyes saw how gorgeous the tree was, how it looked like God. Only better, she thought. She remembered what the serpent had said about God and how the tree would make her like him. She figured fruit and not faith, sin and not obedience, would give her the wisdom she needed to be more perfect than she already was."
I was doing it, but you can't hear it. There we go. I hope that came through properly.
More perfect than she already was. And isn't that something for us to contemplate, that, God has made us, the way he it was just great insight to see, how we mistake or we misunderstand our position before God. When sin entered in, and this was how she summarized the whole fall and sin. And she says this: "Sin, when in the body, cannot stay put. It's not a guest that stays in one room, making sure not to disturb the others. It is a tenant that lives in everything and goes everywhere. It can bleed into every part, choking out anything holy. The glass shattered and broke when it moved in. Adam and Eve, God's first image bearers, made to love and reflect God in creation, had now become the world's first sinners." And so that was big because it answers the first question is, why are people gay? Right?
Yeah.
And so looking at it from the fall, and when I mean fall, I mean sin entering the creation, we really have to reflect on why are things not perfect? Yeah. Why are things the way they are? Now, of course, for those people who don't adhere to a biblical worldview, the question they have to answer is, why are we the way we are? Why are we so messed up as people? And the Bible has the best answer. I don't think a secular worldview can answer why we're so messed up. It can take little parts here and there and address little parts here and there, but not even holistically. It's just
Yeah, like within a particular context and a particular scenario, you could start to unravel, a person's lives to kind of say, okay, that's why they acted the way they did, even though those actions are deemed evil. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like, in a sense, but when you scale it up to a humanity level, nobody really has an explanation.
Yeah, well, or the explanation is not. It's not comprehensive enough.
You wanting.
Yeah. It's definitely not comprehensive enough. So again, why are people gay? Now, I would just flat out answer that in that, one, some people struggle with a same-sex attraction, and they're born with that because of a fallen nature. Same way some people are born pathological liars, or some people are born, as we say, just a bad breed of people.
Well, and I mean, you could say in the same way that some people are athletically gifted and some aren't.
Mm-hmm. Right, but
like it's just the nature of humanity and our broken. Like there is diversity, there is freedom to choose, in a sense. Like, you can act or choose not to act based on your inclination, your proclivities, it's like, as a married man, any proclivity I have to defile that covenant, I have to choose not to follow. And I think I just want to be clear for the listener. By no means am I trying to necessarily box the same-sex attraction and me being married in the same place. What I'm trying to compare is the fact that I always have a choice. At the end of the day, everything you do is still a choice. Whether you are same-sex attracted or not, you still have a choice to make.
Yeah, but then it comes into the question of the depravity of how it basically, or sin basically takes over, and you're no longer free to make the right decisions, where you're in bondage, your will is in bondage to sin. So like I was saying before, the way I would answer why people gay is, one, some people have inclinations to want to do that, and then there are those who are just freaky. So there are people who
are you trying to go down the like nature versus nurture?
No,
concept?
I'm just talking about being a freak.
No, I know. Yeah. I just mean, like, is that to some? I mean, to your point, like, some people are just freaky, right? Like, you think of, like, let's get away from same-sex attracted, and you can use the example of, like, people that are swingers, people that are polyamorous, people that are like
sucking toes. Like, I don't know how that works.
Yeah, right. Like, some people are just freaky, right? And some people might say some of those freaky things sexually are immoral and some aren't. Like, I think for the most part, everyone would agree sexual proclivity towards animals is immoral.
Yeah. No, but right? But I the reason why I bring that up is because, like, I think being gay is cool now. So you have some people who are really gay, and then you have some people who are pretending to be gay, to be cool. Right? So I think it's important, especially for parents, because some parents, their kids are gay, and they're not Christians. And they know that they don't agree with the lifestyle, but the culture tells them, well, no, it's just fine.
You're not allowed to disagree.
Yeah, or this is what normal is. Like for unbelievers, they don't really have a ground to stand on to disagree with these actions. Now, for Christians, we have a worldview that is comprehensive and in regards to looking at the problem and also offering a solution. But yeah, so I say that in one aspect of why are people gay, but then I also wanted to look at the aspect of how she addressed the fall in the garden. And I think that the first 3 chapters of Genesis is essential to having a coherent biblical worldview and also a logical worldview. So, for example, especially like for us living in Canada, and we're the home of legalizing gay marriage. We have gay pride parade. Like, this is just something that's, part of our culture. And as Christians, we should have an apologetic in how to, or apologetic meaning a defense, and learning how to engage with that. Because the reality is that we might have some friends and family that are living the homosexual lifestyle, and we love them, and they're still close to us, and we have friends and people we work with, and we love them, and we're good friends with them, and we want to be able to have deeper conversations about these their lifestyle and so forth. So I
think I want to step back on that for a second, because you said, we love them, and I think there's a bigger issue, like, to some extent, that the reason I say it's a bigger issue is that historically we haven't always loved them as the church. There's been an outsider's sort of like, and I would say that the church had this with regards to sexual sin in general, that there's, two classes of sins. And so to some extent, I think historically we've failed to love our neighbor that has sinned in a particular manner. And for, I would say, to challenge the listeners, is there a particular sin that you see in your non-Christian friends that maybe it's not sexuality, maybe it's something else, where you hold them to, in a higher disregard because of a particular sin? Maybe it's swearing, right? Or speaking in a manner that you find degrading. Does that cause you to, hate your neighbor as opposed to love your neighbor? So I don't know. I just thought it was, something that I think we, as a society, I think, especially the secular world, there's a failure to love those who you are morally in conflict with, right? Like, if you have conflicting moral views, as a Christian, to some extent, we recognize the call to love our neighbor, right? We're the Jew and the Gentile to live peacefully to some extent. But for the culture, that's becoming increasingly difficult because they hate us for our views.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, I know sidebar, but when you said the word love, I just thought I wanted to jump in. So,
okay, so there's three aspects that I just want to quickly address as an apologetic to respond to the rhetoric that we hear in regards to the homosexual lifestyle. And I'm looking at the first three chapters of Genesis. So the three things that I want you to take note of is that marriage, and especially looking at the gay marriage thing. Now, marriage, the point of marriage is not love.
But
marriage is about procreation. And we see that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 to 28. Right? So in chapter 1, 27 to 28.
Pages turning, boys and girls. He's bringing out the big
exegete and
books.
Repeat, baby. Right? So it says here, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. That means make kids. Two men can't make kids. Two women can't make kids. You need a man and a woman to make kids. That's the whole point of marriage, not love. As opposed to the argument being that the whole purpose is that they should be free to love. Yes, you're free to love whoever you want. But marriage, the point of marriage is for making children. Okay, next point.
And I would say not just making children, but providing the environment you're providing for the development of children.
Right. Okay. And now the next point is men, and this being a man problem. Generally, most problems that we have is a man problem. So, again, the common understanding of the fall of Adam and Eve was that it was Eve's fault. It was not Eve's fault. It was Adam's fault. So we see that man failed to be responsible, and we see that in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. And this is something that Jackie Hill pointed out in her rendition of the Genesis account. And so Genesis 3:6 says, and it says, So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. So the question is, where was Adam while Eve was being tricked by the serpent? Well, Adam was there with her, and Adam did not intervene in that conversation. Right? So he was just there, and so she ate the fruit, and
Spectate.
yeah, he was just spectating. He was watching. He wasn't engaged in that conversation, like, just come around, like kind of like, guys, when you see someone you see this guy talking to your girl, and what do? You come up behind your girl and you put your arm around her and be like, hey, is everything good over here, babe? You good? Okay, you good, homie? There was none of that. Adam was just kind of like looking over, like, oh, I hope he doesn't steal my bae or something. I don't know. It wasn't a good look on Adam's part, but him neglecting responsibility.
For his responsibility was because the commandment with regards to that tree was given to him, not to Eve.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Now,
it was his calling or his responsibility.
Yeah, I'm getting
to,
there
to obey. But sorry, steal your thunder. But
okay, so in Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, he is the one that activated sin and not Eve. Because if you look at verse 7, it says, then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. So Eve ate the fruit first, and their eyes weren't open until Adam ate it. And we see the proof of that in verse 7. And that's another point that Jackie Hill points out. And that indicates the created order that man is the federal head of all human creation. And so when we see Adam eating the fruit, their eyes are open to sin. So he's the one to blame and not Eve. And now the next point, Genesis 3, verse 12, you see Adam placing the blame when God says, okay, how did you guys know you were naked? And he said, well, it was the woman you gave me. So here again, we have him not taking responsibility for his actions, but him blaming women for his faults. Doesn't that sound familiar, ladies? Men not taking responsibility for their actions and blaming women for their problems. And then finally, the last point is Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. The result of that fall in sin entering creation is a cursed relationship between men and women. And we see that in verse 16 where it says, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And that desire isn't a good desire, but that you will be constantly bumping heads with your husband. So even when we look at our marriages and when we become married, we see the friction between men and women, and that's why it's important to get biblical counseling as you guys come together, because you don't just have, your backgrounds from your, coming from a broken home working against you, but you also have sin working against your relationship in that way to split you guys apart. Now, and the last part. So
yeah? That essentially that's referred to, verse 16 is essentially referred to as the curse of woman. And there's a curse of man that I'm assuming is at the follow. Yeah. To Adam, verse 17 to 19, which I'm assuming is where you're going next, right?
No.
Okay.
I just wanted to leave it. I just wanted to leave it at that.
Okay.
That the marriage, that relationship aspect. And then my final point is God provides a covering for man's shame in Genesis 3, chapter 3, verse 21. So when they were naked, God basically kills an animal and uses that as a covering for them to cover their shame. And that will lead us going forward into the book and so forth. Now
So I just wanted to step back for a second. What translation did you read verse 16 from? Just for
English Standard Version.
Yeah. So you're the verse was it your desire shall be contrary to your husband?
Oh, and is that what you have? What translation is that?
I have that on as ESV on Bible Gateway.
Oh.
And the footnote says or shall be toward. It's an updated version. But anyways, the point I wanted to bring, I think there's a couple ways to interpret or like what is the original text, that we're translating here. But there's an understanding that this is, the desire to be for your husband is to some extent for his interpreted as your desire will be to have his role.
Right. That's right.
Right. And so it's essentially there's a inherent conflict in from a struggle with respect to the role of man, the role of woman, and for some of the listeners, maybe there's a different let's say view on egalitarianism, complementarianism, those kind of things. But I think if you do a deep exegesis or read some good commentaries that are trying to really exegete this text, it's pretty soundly understood that the curse of woman is that you're going to struggle with headship to some extent. Yeah, just thought that's a good. I don't know. I like text like this that's meaty and has a lot to chew on. So
it is.
Hey, meaty. For the listener, if you think I'm wrong, you got your commentary or whatnot that you think is in contradictory or challenges what I'm saying. Go ahead, send it to us.
Yeah.
But anyways, Darnell, continue.
On with the show. Okay, so now we're looking at men. Point 2, men as the problem, and so Jackie starts talking about her relationship with men, and she had 2 experiences that kind of broke her. So her father not being there, or him being there but not being there, and then there was another situation where she was sexually abused. Oh, I forgot. We're going to give a lot of spoilers. So if you're planning to read the book, it's too late. But so we're just going into your spoilers. So if you're planning to read the book, go read the book first and then come back. And if you're not, well, here you go. This is a freebie. So basically, she was sexually abused as a child, and so there was an interesting back and forth with her father, in that they had the same birthday, which was kind of cool, but also like he was never there. And there was this one conversation she had with him where he said that he has other kids, but he would be like, it wouldn't bother him not to see her or them ever again. Like, it wouldn't bother him. He loves her. He said, I love you, but I wouldn't feel a way if I never saw you guys again. And so she says this in the book, and she says, who I was made more sense when I was with him. He was a different mirror. With him, I could see where I'd gotten things my mama didn't own. I enjoyed every minute with this inconsistent relative I called Daddy, until he started using words that I didn't believe belonged to him, like, I love you. That sentence was too big to fit in his mouth.
That's heavy.
Bruh. And then she goes on to say, over time, I was convinced there can only be so many missed birthdays, missed first bike ride, missed changes in height, weight, grade, schools, until the heart becomes comfortable with keeping the man whose blood helped to build it out. You go, girl.
So, I mean, what's crazy is like, we're talking about fatherlessness, but you're also talking about broken homes. And I mean, I'm looking at it on the other side of the spectrum, going like, realizing how blessed I am in that, like, my parents are still together and Jenna's parents are still together. Like the abnormality of that in today's world. It's and I think this is where what you talked about at the very beginning, right? What is the purpose of marriage?
Make
children.
Mhm.
And you know, I would say,
And it also provides the right context for sex.
yes, and I mean, we haven't gone down that road much, but I mean, it's the safety. Safety is not the right word I'm looking for. It's the commitment side of it. If you know, in the sense of if you take out things like abortion, the vulnerable nature sex and pregnancy creates for women.
Mhm.
That's really why marriage essentially provides the proper context for sex.
Mhm.
Because if you go back a couple hundred years where you got a woman pregnant, if you weren't going to provide for her, what life did you just condemn her to?
Mhm.
Because of the inability to both provide for yourself and take care of something that cannot take care of themselves for many, many years. Something being the child. So yeah, we went down that road just from the point I was trying to make, that culturally, you know, how much actually I was about to say, you know, the cultural view of marriage I think is too selfish. And I know for me, having kids and being married is the thing that points out my selfishness the most, or in Christian speak, God is using my marriage and children to sanctify me the most with regards to my own pride and selfishness.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because it, you know, the requirements to put other people's priorities above my own wants is so fundamental in the
Mhm.
in the role as a father, that I think taking marriage too lightly is what causes marriage to break down.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, so then now she closes out this chapter, and again, this is a section that I'm gonna read to you because I can explain it, but she says it so much better than I can. And she says this: between fatherlessness and sexual abuse, my entire frame of reference for people God made male was built on the experience of their doing. One man's absence taught me men were incapable of loving. Only in short, sporadic flashes of affection would they be able to do what they'd said they'd do. Made up of an inconsistent spine straightened out by everything else but their own flesh and blood. I refuse to believe men could stand for truth ever. The other man was not a real one at all, but while becoming a man, he decided to act out his urges on a child, a girl child whose first introduction to male affection wouldn't be her daddy's hug, but another male's lusts. The consequence being that a man's touch sounded like everything unsafe. Sexual abuse, for me, turned male intimacy into an undignified practice of the male ego, to which I would only be a body to conquer and not a person to love. I didn't know it with the same amount of assurance, yet but all the while another man was loving me always. That other man being Jesus Christ, if y'all couldn't fill in the blanks. But yeah,
man,
that was deep, and I thought that
that's
was
heavy.
yeah, no, it was well said.
Like, I mean, I like, for me, obviously that's the first time I heard it, and there's just this like groaning in my spirit of like pain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like I think of my own, you know, proclivity as a man with regards to lust and with regards to, you know, guarding my heart, guarding my eyes, and like, and now take that like I'm looking at it with respect to, like, you know, as a man, you know, you're intentional to, I want to honor my wife and not objectify women. But this is like another dimension of, you know, objectification, if that makes sense. And when I say another dimension, I just mean like the perversion / exploitation of vulnerability with the child side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I said, like, you know, it's just because, you know, if the thing she's saying, had she said it, as a, you know, teenager with another teenager, I would presume there's an aspect of it doesn't carry the same pain as it does when you're being exploited and you're lacking the father relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for me, the takeaway, and that's why the second point is, you know, men are the problem. Again, like, all it took was her father to be responsible, right? And be there for her. Not even just be there for her, but, you know, marry her mother, be there for her. All it took was for that young man to not take advantage of her as a little girl. And we see, you know, men constantly failing at being responsible and protecting women and serving them. And so now we have this broken relationship and this cycle of madness. And again, like, the family is the foundation for society. You know, we come together as man and woman. We have children. We prepare children to go into the world to become functional citizens. But if you're missing one half of that person that's helping to raise the child, you know, we're going to have a culture where people are leaving their homes broken, and they're going into the culture broken, and they're making more broken people. So it's important for us, especially as men, to get back to this biblical ethic of being responsible for our women and for our sexuality, and not sleeping all over the place, and taking care of our kids. And yeah, but I just thought that was a really good insight, and I really thought that helped contribute to put the nail in the coffin for Jackie Hill and her becoming gay. So yes, she talked about like an inclination inside, but I really believe that, you know, her experience with men has definitely sealed the deal.
Yeah. Well, and I think of the have you heard the term like poisoning the well?
No.
It's more of, it's like a logical fallacy. But it's this idea of like, you're kind of poisoning the well is kind of like, you know, if I was to propose a question to you in such a way that's like making it so that you obviously are going to hate one thing over the other, right? So like, my point of here is like, you know, the way men treated her as a child poisoned the well for future men relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, it sounds like her story has, like many stories in this regard, have a combination of nature and nurture with regards to homosexuality, same-sex attraction, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so the next section is called Stop Being Gay. Do you need, and in brackets, do you need the gospel to stop being gay? And so when she's converted to Christianity, now she starts documenting her experience and wrestling with not practicing the homosexual lifestyle. And so she ends up living with a woman named Santoria. So the church she basically moves in with Santoria to be discipled by her. And so she talks to Santoria about like her lustful desires, and Santoria's helping her through that. And Santoria says to her, and I quote, "You fight lust with the gospel, Jackie." And then Jackie says, "The gospel? How?" I said, unsure whether her advice had any practicality to it. I was hoping she'd provide me with a special sin rebuking prayer, not a petition to just remember the gospel. And then Santorio says, when Jesus died and rose, he gave you power to defeat sin, literally. Like you don't have to give in. Every single time you are tempted to sin, just remember the reality that Jesus defeated it already. You're not a slave. You are free. You just have to believe that and walk in it. And then she says, yes, Jackie, the gospel didn't just save you, it also keeps you. And then, Jackie Hill does an excellent job going through like what the gospel is and the power of it. And that was definitely rocking me, because she was just really giving really awesome insights into it. So she quotes from Jeff Vanderstelt, and he says, the gospel doesn't just bring about forgiveness of sins and save us from hell. The gospel of Jesus Christ empowers us to live a whole new life today by the same Spirit who raised Jesus from the dead. How is it then that I would think that God would provide another way for me to walk freely that did not find its pulse in his gospel? And so this whole section made me ask the question, like, is the gospel the only answer? Now she concludes with this part, and she says, the gospel of God saved my life. In others, he'd done the same. And in doing so, my life, when around theirs, could look more like his. Who was I to think I could look like the triune God by trying to live alone? And she was talking about the sanctifying work of living in community with people. And I love how she just said, who was I to think I could look like the triune God by trying to live alone? The triune God is communal. Kind of like Timothy Brindle said it best. He's like, true indeed, there's nothing that you would need as a triune loving community. And so it was one of those aspects where I said, okay, well, for the parent who is not a Christian, for people who aren't Christians, and there are some people who aren't Christians who don't agree with the homosexual lifestyle. Like, or there are people who
would be critical of it.
Yeah, no, not just that, but there are people who are struggling with homosexual inclinations, and their conscience, because God says, we all have conscience and we suppress it, but with their conscience, they're saying, well, you know what? I have desires to be with the same sex, but I don't want to. Like there is that category of people who don't want to. Well, for those people who don't want to, and this is, unbelievers, they don't have a choice because the culture says, no, you just accept it and go along with it.
And, I was going to say the culture, the culture kind of tells them that's not appropriate response.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is that can sear the conscience where the person is just locked in, where they're like, okay, well, if the homosexual lifestyle is considered to be normal, and now again, I'm speaking from an unbeliever perspective. If the homosexual lifestyle is considered to be normal, then to be unhomosexual or to be heterosexual would be abnormal. To go from being gay to not gay would be abnormal. Meaning it's impossible. That's not a thing. But this is why I love Jackie Hill's book and why I think Jackie Hill is making so much waves in the culture, is because that is a narrative that is rare, where people think, wait a minute. I'm sure there's even Christians. I'm sure there's Christians who are looking at Jackie Hill and hearing this or hearing about her for the first time and saying, like, what? That's impossible. God saves people from all kinds of stuff, but not that. Like, you don't hear about people coming out of that lifestyle and changing it up. You know what I mean? Like coming out of a lifestyle and saying, okay, look, I'm not going to give in to these urges because yeah, like my conscience is telling me no, I don't want to do that. I believe that it is wrong.
So what you're kind of reminding me of when I was listening to the podcast, Jackie Hill was talking about she got protested at Harvard University because she was speaking on sexuality, and to some extent she was speaking about not so much specifically on homosexuality or gay lifestyle, but just on really the over sexuality of our culture. And because she said, like, you know, the people who came and heard her talk, like, it was really good. It was a really good, you know, sort of engagement, even with people, let's say, that would disagree with her. And so I thought it was you know, just to add to what you're saying, that there's also just sexuality in general, right? Like, the culture is essentially like overtly pro this kind of like promotion of being, I don't want to say sexually deviant, but to some extent that's kind of how I'm perceiving it. It's just this like overt like sexuality in everything. Like, you know, you just look at movies and you look at, you know, mainstream, just what we consider acceptable with regards to sexuality on TV. And I'm not even talking like with respect to like the types of sexual relationships, but just, you know, the way that we show affection even has become overly sexualized within movies. And, you know, even when you look at, like, let's say a movie that's got a PG rating, they're just kind of PG is probably not the right reference, but the idea I'm trying to get at is TV, you know, movie ratings that are, or show ratings that are, you know, not having sexuality in them, there's still so much kind of reference and, you know, innuendo as to, you know, sex is a normal part of culture. I was talking with Jenna about it, and she's like, you know, TV shows make it like, you know, kids are having so much sex as teenagers, and to some extent that might be true some of the time. But there's an aspect of like promoting it as normal and proper and acceptable. And so, you know, she, as much as, you know, you're pointing out that she's kind of coming out of that lifestyle and being critical towards it, or kind of demonstrating like, you know, that you don't have, you know, you still have a choice to make. Or she's also breaking some of the societal expectations with regards to sexuality.
Oh yeah,
in general,
for sure.
Right. And that's what I'm appreciating when she is speaking. She's, because of the lifestyle she lived, she just has so much insight into how she felt unfulfilled and broken, and the freedom and you know, the life that she's living now, and how that's you know, rewarding, if you want to call it that, and being a mother and all these things that yeah, I don't know. I would say to listeners, you know, if we've enticed you with regards to her content, either read the book or check out podcasts with her. Check out talks. She's a beast, to say the least.
Hey, Joel Jeezy with the bars. There you go, Joel. There you go, Joel. A beast, to say the least. Yo, Freestyle Friday. Okay, all right. So
accidental rap on the podcast.
Hey, man.
One liner, maybe, not really a rap.
Yeah. All right. So, okay. So again, like the question I was just asking: can a person, you know, like stop being gay apart from the gospel? And I would say the unbeliever can't stop being gay because they have no reason to. The culture, the environment encourages it, and it would be abnormal not to. So that's why the gospel is so important to this fight, that the gospel does offer hope. And I think it's important to remember that God is not just the great judge, but he's also the great physician, and that he heals us from our sinful ailments. And that's good news.
And I think, well, you know, just wanted to kind of point out that part of the aspect of the gospel that I think is fundamental to what you just said is that the gospel and essentially the Bible provides an objective standard for morality. And for the culture that doesn't believe, there is no such thing as an objective standard. And as such, it's all, what do you feel? Relative, right? Like it's, as long as it's culturally acceptable, your feelings are okay. Whatever you desire to do, if it's culturally acceptable, then you can do it, which is totally subjective, not objective.
We're coming to the end of the book and part 3. So this next part is about part 3 and her application of how to deal with these sexual urges. And she's basically talking about Christians who struggle with the same-sex urges. So this isn't about unbelievers at this point. It's about Christians who struggle with same-sex urges. And she's not talking about people who say they're Christian and champion their homosexuality. She would say, no, that's not what she's talking about, and nor is that biblical. So it is possible for a person to be a blood-bought, saved person, but still have a desire for wanting to be with the same sex. Just as somebody, when they come to Christ, those temptations don't go away, for whether it's watching porn or wanting to steal, wanting to lie. These temptations are still there. And same thing with people who are struggling with homosexual urges. Those things are still being there. So she refers to them as same-sex attracted Christians. Under this heading, I'm going to be talking about identity, endurance, and heterosexual gospel. So the identity aspect has to deal with identity politics type stuff. And this is what she says. The world we find ourselves in has made sexuality central to our identity, an identity where pride is demonstrated by waving a promise made after God destroyed the world with water. Gayness is not just a way to act, but a way to be. It is, as they say, just who you are. And I thought that was well said as well, with the play on words about the pride flag. And I think it's important to make a distinction when it comes to identity, and this is very important to the Christian apologetic against the homosexual agenda. I have this book also called Desire and Deceit: The Real Cost of the New Sexual Tolerance by Al Mohler. And so there's a section here, and it says, Maggie Gallagher, who wrote the book Enemies of Eros, she said, indeed, this was the ideological wedge used to force the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in 1973. So at one point, it was seen as a mental disorder, but because of the homosexual agenda and political correctness, that's no longer seen as a mental illness.
Well, and this is a total sidebar. What's crazy is that you have people promoting that sort of shifting with regards to pedophilia.
Right. Oh yeah. No, you definitely see that same argument.
I'm not trying to necessarily draw parallels between the two things. That's a different time, different place. I'm just drawing a parallel between what you just described happening and what's happening today in the culture. Like, you can find people who will publicly declare that pedophilia is a sexual orientation.
Okay, and the next point is endurance. And then so she says, I've had countless conversations with many same-sex attracted men and women who are either trying to adhere to a biblical sexual ethic or have tried. Weary-eyed and burdened, they come to me, head almost bowed, to welcome me into their frustration. Eventually, they confess the reason for their cloudiness. It's just so hard, they say, leaving the sentence without any extra explanation. The difficulty of trying to resist same-sex attractions tends to lead some into the depressing cycle of self-condemnation and discouragement. For others, it can lead them away from the faith they once attempted to anchor themselves in altogether. Right? And so she goes on to say, being strengthened to endure and being given the power to obey doesn't make obedience easy, but it does make it possible. So again, her insights in regards to the sanctification process, meaning how we become more holy. That's what sanctification means, being made more holy. And yeah, she gives a really great insight into like, yes, it's frustrating, and yes, we have to endure. But again, Jesus talks about, picking up your cross and dying to yourself daily. She says again, it's the power to obey, but it doesn't mean that it's gonna that makes obedience easy, but it does make it possible. And I think that's encouraging. And then she concludes this section with, the great contrast between us and Jesus is this: Jesus was sorrowful at the prospect of him experiencing the displeasure of God. But most, if not all, of us become sorrowful at the prospect of not experiencing the pleasures of sin. Jesus didn't endure because he was strong. He was most likely at one of the weakest points of his humanity, but he endured because he loved his God. Therefore, he was fully committed to doing the will of God no matter the cost. This love is what will help us persevere, a love that sees knowing God as the body's greatest pleasure. Amen. Hallelujah. Pass the collection plate. Man.
Well, and I think, when you say that, I think of Christian hedonism, John Piper.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just kind of that, where do we obtain pleasure from, and how, and as a Christian, how does that reconcile with the calling of the gospel with respect to the ultimate source of our pleasure and pursuing that, right? So, it kind of goes back to the idea of being selfish, or as I was talking about being sanctified by, or being sanctified with respect to my selfishness. And the reason I say that is because most of, when we're pleasure oriented in general, it's self orientation, right? Like, it's all about me. But in essence, the gospel is demonstrating that what will bring the most pleasure is glorifying God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the final section, heterosexual gospel, is a very profound and needed commentary that she gives here. And basically, the heterosexual gospel is telling people Christians who are struggling with same-sex attraction, telling them that God will make you heterosexual. So, which is not true,
or biblical,
right? God, God wants to make you a lover of Him first. So it's not about being a heterosexual. God is saving you to make you a Christian, not a heterosexual. He's not promising you a husband or a wife of the opposite sex. Marriage might not be part of your life when you become a Christian. So singleness might be what you're called to. And she does an excellent job. And I never really considered that this would be a hindrance to people who are struggling with the same-sex attraction, or even people who are gay and you're witnessing to them. Like, that might not be the case where they become heterosexual. And so she gives her commentary, and she says this: marriage truly is glorious. In all of its glory, however, it is not the highest glory. Marriage for some time has been esteemed idealistically as a mini heaven, perhaps, unguarded by golden gates, entered into preferably before a woman's pretty begins to die, or by the time a man is ready to plant his seed. From the time a young girl learns of love, she's taught it's in its purest form when a white dress carries a woman into an I do. Cartoons and children's books indoctrinate us young with the cartoons and children's books indoctrinate us young with this ideal. But they aren't the only ones making a utopia of marriage. And then she goes on to say, the exaggerated promise of marriage or the unbalanced emphasis on its place in the Christian life can lead same-sex attracted men and women to being disoriented about God's specific call for them, which we can say with confidence, God's call is this, to love God and love people. Matthew chapter 22, verse 36 to 40. And then she goes on to say, beyond earth, another trait setting marriage apart from the Lord himself is that it is not eternal. It will expire once the breath does and become something done only on earth until that itself is done anew. The marriage that will last, however, is the marriage between Christ and his church, like two deathless stars meant to burn forever. God and his church will always be married, always be in love, always be one, so much so that death will never part them, for even that will be no more. Amen, Jackie. Like she's
spitting fire.
Hot bars like Dylon. Just it's crazy. So we see here she starts talking about also the singleness is not a curse. And she was just preaching through this. And she goes on to say, in the heterosexual gospel, singleness is whispered or completely kept from the discussion of what might come after coming to faith in Christ. Singleness is that country no one wants other people to visit. So they rip the shape of its borders off of maps, thinking that the possibility of its discovery might turn same-sex attracted travelers back around into the darker continent. But countless same-sex attracted men and women deserve the privilege of having another passport if necessary. It could be that in an attempt not to discourage same-sex attracted believers, Christians refrain from mentioning singleness as the only proper alternative for their lives if marriage never arrives. But honestly, to only mention marriage and not include singleness is just as discouraging, if not more discouraging. For many dealing with same-sex attractions, some same-sex attracted men and women haven't and will never fully know how it feels to have a sexual attraction for someone of the opposite sex. Though sexual attraction desire is not the foundation for a fruitful heterosexual marriage, it is in fact an aspect of it. For these men and women to be married would be more of a trial for them than a gift. But if they have no idea of the beauty of singleness because it was never presented to them on those terms, then how would they know to embrace the season for which they may find themselves in with joy instead of despair?
Whew. She's just, she's a wordsmith, right? Like she was poetry first, but she's also a rapper.
And a pretty good expositor and a pretty good theologian. Yeah, she's really excellent. And so and then she talks about the aspect of, just singleness and community and how it's important for, the church to show there's other meaningful relationships besides the sexual one. And that's something we as the body of Christ and as brothers and sisters in Christ to exhibit what that deeper relationship of a family looks like. Not just a sexual relationship, but they can also find meaningfulness in brotherhood, sisterhood, spiritual fathers, spiritual mothers, and so forth. So her insights were really awesome, and man, I can't promote this book enough. It's definitely a necessary grab.
So I think that's probably the first time you finished a Type Beast episode with that.
Really? Oh, okay.
I mean, I think back to some of the other ones with, we did the Tim Challies one. You talked about useful tools. You've talked about being insightful, but actually calling the book a necessary grab. In terms of, especially for the Christian, I think, who's largely ignorant. I mean, myself included in this, largely ignorant of let's say, someone who's had that experience.
Before I close out, I want to share with the listeners a section of the book that made me tear up, if I could say that on the air. Now, I didn't cry. So I had water coming up in my eyes. When the water starts coming up in your eyes. But it's only crying if it hits your face. It's only crying if the water falls out of your eye and it hits your face. So the water was coming up, but then I
boy grabbed his nuts and held on tight.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So I had to grab my composure. But yeah, this part really tore me up. So please, bear with me on this one. So I'm going to read a quote from it. So this is on page 79, chapter 9, 2008. And this is, the context is, this is after her conversion, like the very next day after she came to the Lord. I arrived at work the next day, a new creature. Though my soul was much different, my clothes were the same. My extra-large uniform, with its dark blue button-up and oversized black dickies, didn't feel normal anymore. My best friend and coworker, Mike, looked at me and said, "You look different." "What do you mean?" I said, "Considering the fact that my boxers were still showing and my chest was flattened by an extra small sports bra. I don't know, man. You just look brighter." Maybe he noticed that the veil had been removed, but didn't know what to call it. And then that whole veil aspect was from 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16. And that made me tear up because I believe her. I believed her. Like when she said that, I believe like she wasn't using wordplay. This wasn't a metaphor. That when he saw her, like he didn't know what happened the night before. He just said, "Yo, you look brighter." You know what I mean? And like when we have an experience with God, like it shows. It isn't just in your clothes.
It radiates. Yeah,
it radiates. It isn't just you having a head covering or having a long dress or not wearing makeup or not wearing baggy jeans or covering up your tattoos. People just if you're walking with the Lord, people just see it. They see the joy and they see the glory of God in you. So when he said that, you look different, you look brighter. I'm like, my heart skipped a beat and my eyes started to water because I was like, yo, praise God. Praise God. Like he sees it like it was a real conversion that she experienced. So I was just really happy and excited and I was fired up. Got me, singing, I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back.
So that reminds me, the pod that nobody will ever hear me sing on a podcast.
Yeah. No, man. It was a beautiful book, well written, very encouraging, sound theology. And so I would just leave the listeners with, as Christians, it's important that that we have a deeper understanding of sexual sin that makes us empathetic to the LGBTQ2S community, because, as the passage says, such were some of you. And as those who have experienced the life-changing power of God, we must do a better job of communicating hope that is only found in Jesus Christ. Don't believe the hype, read the type.